Every night, no matter what the weather is like, something walks along our neighborhood and softly whistles. You can only hear it passing by if you're in the living room or the kitchen. And that whistling always begins at exactly 3:03 a.m. The sound starts out very faintly, somewhere near the beginning of the street by the Carson family's house. Our house is roughly in the middle of the road, so the sound gradually grows louder as it approaches us and then fades away as it moves farther down the dead-end street. When I was little, my sister and I would often sneak into the kitchen just to secretly listen to the whistling. My parents absolutely did not want us doing that, and we would certainly be punished if we got caught. But they were not overly strict with us because, no matter what happened, we always obeyed one important rule. Don't try to look at the whistler. My neighborhood is a very special place. The houses here are quite small, but they are laid out very efficiently. Every house has a yard and is beautifully decorated. There are plenty of places to play, and many other children here are around my age. Last October, I turned 13. We grew up together, and our group was always playing somewhere in the neighborhood. Sometimes we would meet at the cul-de-sac, the place the whistler reaches every night. Other times we would play in the flower-filled gardens during the summer. This is a very good place to grow up. I'm old enough to recognize that now. And there are only two strange things about this place. The whistling every night and the blessings of this neighborhood. The whistling has never really been a problem for me. As I mentioned before, if you're in your bedroom, you can't even hear it. But my parents seem incapable of liking it. That's why I never asked too many questions about it. My father is a tall, strong, and calm man. He has a regional accent because of his family. My grandparents came from another island chain. He came to America when he was still a child. The only times he seems to lose his composure are when the whistler appears. My father talks faster, his eyes dart around more quickly, and he reminds us not to pay too much attention to it and to always remember one single rule, one very important rule. Don't try to look outside when the whistler is passing by. The truth is, even if we wanted to, we couldn't really see anything. You see, there are shutters on every window. Thick wooden panels are pulled down to completely cover the windows and secured with a latch at the bottom. Each shutter is further protected by a lock that can be opened with a small key. Every night, my father lowers the shutters, locks them, and then stores the key in his room. As for my mother, I don't know what she thinks about the whistling. I have seen my mother sitting in the living room at exactly 3:03 a.m. when the whistling begins. I could see her simply by cracking my bedroom door open a little and peeking through the gap. She usually isn't out there at that hour, or at least, I haven't caught her there very often. But about once or twice a month, my mother would sit out in the living room in our red chair and simply listen. The whistler always had a particular tune, and it sounded cheerful. Remember when I said there were two strange things about this place? Well, besides our late-night whistler, everyone in the neighborhood was incredibly lucky. It's difficult to explain, and my father doesn't like us talking about it too much. But good things always seem to happen to the people who stay on this land. Winning some contest on the radio, getting an unexpected promotion at work, or discovering an ancient arrowhead right in your backyard. The weather here is wonderful, and not a single crime has ever occurred. Every family's flower garden blooms magnificently in the fall, a million little blessings. That's how my mother described living here. But the main reason our family stayed in this place, the reason we moved here in the first place, was because of my little sister, Noah. She was born very frail. I still remember how tiny Noah was. Much smaller than other newborn babies. She needed a machine just to breathe. We moved into this house so we could be closer to the hospital. As soon as we moved in, Noah's condition started improving. The doctors couldn't understand why. They tried to explain it as the result of their treatments. But all of us knew that they themselves were confused. My parents, and even I, knew that Noah getting better was simply one of the millions of blessings this neighborhood brought. That's why we stayed here, even after discovering that for every miracle that happened here each day, there were occasionally bad things as well. But the bad things only happened if you deliberately broke the rules and went looking for the whistler. Our neighborhood had a group of people whose job was to welcome new families. They would show up with a casserole, a gift basket, and an envelope to greet the newcomers. They were very friendly. 4 of them came to our house when we first moved here 7 years ago. They asked about all sorts of things, gave me a Snickers bar, and took turns holding Nola. It was the first week she had been allowed out of the hospital, so they were extremely careful. After that, they wanted to speak privately with my parents, so I was sent to my bedroom and the door was closed. Even so, I could still hear most of what they were saying through the door. They told my parents about the blessings of this neighborhood, about the good things that happened here and how difficult they were to explain. And then they told my parents about something even harder to explain. The whistling that came from the street every morning at 3:03 a.m. and ended precisely at 3:05. Those neighbors warned my parents that the whistling was very soft, and that we would never be harmed as long as we never looked toward whatever was making that whistling sound. Though we waited. At exactly 3:03 a.m., we heard the whistling. It came and went exactly as the group had said it would. The whistling returned every night after that, and we never looked outside. We simply lived our lives and enjoyed millions of little blessings every day. Nola gradually became able to breathe on her own without a machine. And she grew up into a strong, intelligent girl. My father even joined the welcoming group. We didn't get many new neighbors, and hardly anyone ever wanted to move away. But whenever a new family arrived, my father and the other members would bring over a casserole, a gift basket, and an envelope. By the expression on my father's face, I could usually tell whether the family was taking all of this seriously or not. Not long ago, a family moved into the house right next to ours. The previous owner of the house, Mrs. Maddie, had passed away at the age of 105. She had lived a long and happy life. It seemed that our new neighbors adapted to this place rather quickly. They completely believed everything my father told them and followed his advice to install additional shutters on the windows if there were children in the house. They believed everything in the newspapers, everything in the letter, all the evidence, all the photographs that my father never let us see. But I figured it must have been bad. Bad enough that the family followed every bit of advice my father gave them without a single objection. And then one evening, when our neighbors had to leave town, they asked my parents to look after their young son, Holden, a 12-year-old boy who was 1 grade below me. I hadn't interacted with him much before, but the moment his parents left after dinner, I could already tell that this kid was going to be trouble. Do you know about the person who always walks down the street at night whistling? Holden asked me the moment the adults left the room. The 3 of us were sitting in the living room watching some Disney movie on TV. My sister and I exchanged a glance. We shouldn't talk about that. I answered. I think that weird person lives in the big yellow house on the corner, Holden continued. Mr. Jose, my sister said. No way. He's really nice. Holden scoffed. Nice people can still be serial killers. Nola looked uncomfortable after hearing him say that. We don't talk about that here, I repeated. Come on, let's go to my room and play Nintendo. We spent the next few hours playing games, eating popcorn, and watching more movies. It was a normal kid sleepover. But I could tell that Holden was still preoccupied with the subject we didn't want to talk about. After my parents told us good night, locked the window shutters, and went to their room, Holden suddenly sat up from his sleeping bag and walked over to Nola and me. Have either of you ever tried peeking? He asked. It's almost time. Like at every kid's sleepover, we refused to go to sleep when we were supposed to. I glanced at the clock and was startled to see that Holden was right. It was almost 3 in the morning. I sighed and said, we shouldn't. Listen, you can't. You can't look outside anyway because your dad locks everything up every night and hides the key. He kept talking, ignoring my warning. Our dad does that too, Nola said. No, Holden replied. No. He doesn't do that. You saw him do it, I said. This time, my voice was much more stern. Holden smirked. Your dad pulls down the shutters. Yeah. But he doesn't hide the key. He keeps it on his regular keyring. So what? I asked, worried about what he was planning. Because I knew that, my dad never bothered to hide his keyring. Well, right after he locked the shutters but before he went to bed, I might have pretended to go to the bathroom. And on the way there, I might have peeked into your parents' room. And I might have seen him leave the keyring right on the nightstand. And I might have snuck in and taken the key that unlocks the shutters. Nola and I stared at him as his grin grew wider and wider. You're lying, I said. Holden pouted. You can go check if you want. Just open your parents' bedroom door and look. You'll see a keyring sitting right there on the bedside table. Stay here, I told them. Don't move an inch. I hurried toward my parents' bedroom, but stopped right outside the door. If Holden wasn't lying, my father was going to be extremely angry. Furious. Just thinking about it scared me. But I was even more afraid of the shutters being opened and the Whistler standing outside. I cracked the door open just a little and looked inside. But it was far too dark to see anything. Taking a deep breath, I stepped into the room. The moment both of my feet entered the darkness, my body seemed to freeze. The whistling began, and I could hear it clearly from my parents' room. I had never realized that they had been forced to listen to this whistling every single night since we moved here. They had never told us. I don't think I could sleep with that sound. I stood there, listening as the whistling grew closer, unsure whether I should turn on the light or call out to wake my father. A metallic click from the living room snapped me out of my thoughts. Nola! I shouted, running out of my parents' room. Holden and Nola were standing near the front door, and right beside it was a window. Holden hadn't been lying. Even from a distance, I could see him fiddling with the lock. I heard another click. He really did have the key. Holden let out an excited laugh. Nola was standing right next to him, crouched down slightly, frightened but also a little curious. The Whistler was standing right outside our house. I think I made some kind of sound, maybe I shouted. I can't remember. Time seemed to slow down. The clock on the wall kept ticking, but my body was still moving normally. I wasn't fast. I wasn't athletic at all. But somehow, in an instant, I was standing right beside Nola. My eyes locked onto her face as I heard Holden pulling the shutter up. I could hear the rattling clicks as it opened all the way, and I could hear the whistling very close now, right on the other side of the window. But I managed to grab Nola and spin her around so that her back was facing the window. At the same moment, I squeezed my eyes shut as the window was thrown wide open. A moment later, the whistling stopped. I could feel Nola trembling in my arms. Don't look, okay? I said to her. Don't turn around. We were standing in a position where her back was facing the hallway while I was facing directly toward the window. I kept my eyes tightly shut and felt her nod against my shoulder. I reached out with one hand, trying to find Holden. My hand touched his. He was trembling even more than Nola. Holden? I asked. But I got nothing in response. I reached farther and felt the window hinge. With my eyes still shut, I could feel the glass beneath my fingertips. It was ice cold. Strangely cold for this time of year. I moved my hand upward along the window, searching for the pull cord of the shutter. The air gradually grew warmer as I reached higher. Then a humming sound filled the air, creating a wave of vibration that I could physically feel. I tried not to think about whatever was standing on the other side of the window. Finally, I found the cord and pulled it down with a slam. I opened my eyes. By the dim light coming from the kitchen, I could make out Holden, pale and small, still staring at the now shuttered window. "Holden?" I asked again. He turned to look at me and screamed. I was still dazed by what had just happened. Everything felt blurred. A light came on in the hallway, then another in the living room. I heard my parents' footsteps on the hardwood floor. I still didn't turn to look at them. My eyes remained fixed on Holden. He was deathly pale, biting his lip so hard that a thin stream of bright red blood ran down his chin, and it looked like he had been so terrified that he had wet his pants. "What happened, Dad?" I said, hearing him from behind me. I turned away from Holden and looked at my father. He looked. I had never seen my father panic before, but that night I did. In that moment, an old, ugly fear revealed itself on his face. The fear of a parent. "Only Holden?" he asked me quietly. I nodded. My father let out a relieved breath. He looked so relieved that for a moment I thought he was about to celebrate something. But then he turned toward Holden, and his expression changed again. I wondered whether my father felt guilty knowing that Holden was the only one who had looked. Then there was a knock at the door. All of us froze where we stood. Holden began to whimper. "Don't do anything," my mother said. She was standing near the hallway. I had always thought that my mother was still a little skeptical and found it a little ridiculous that my father boarded up the windows and worried about the whistler. But that night, all of us believed. I noticed that both of my parents were holding baseball bats that they had brought from their bedroom. The knocking came again, louder this time. "Please don't open the door," Holden whispered. My father walked over to him and pulled him into an embrace. "It's okay," my father promised, still gripping the bat tightly in one hand. "Nothing can get in here tonight." This time, the knocking was so loud and forceful that the door shook violently. Holden screamed, and Nola clung tightly to me. My mother came over to us and knelt down, wrapping an arm around me and my sister. "Call the police," my mother whispered to my father. The knocking suddenly stopped. My father looked back at us over his shoulder. "You think they could?" He was cut off by a series of violent bangs against the door. Then came a few gentle knocks. "Police! Police!" Something spoke from the other side of the door. The voice sounded exactly like my mother's, like a parrot mimicking her voice. "Police! Police!" My mother pulled us even closer. "Police! Police! 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 Stop it, please!" I heard her whisper. "I don't think the police can help us," my father said. "Even if they really did come, how would we know they're actually the police?" The knocking returned, even harder than before. The door shook violently, as if it were about to come off its hinges. Then it stopped. After a long moment, I heard banging again, but this time it was coming from the back door of the house. We all turned toward the back door, and immediately the noise returned to the front door. Front, then back, then front. Noise, then silence. Noise, then silence. Suddenly, the sound came from both doors at once. The impacts were loud and heavy, like blows from a hammer. Then something began pounding on the windows all around the house, and then on the walls, as if we were inside a drum with dozens of people outside beating on it. Or as if we were a turtle and someone was trying to force us out of our shell. "Stop it!" Holden screamed. The pounding stopped. "I won't tell anyone," Holden said, staring at the door. "I promise I won't tell anyone what I saw. Please, just go away." We stood there waiting and listening for about a minute. And then we heard it. A small tap, tap, tap against the window Holden had looked through earlier. Holden began sobbing, like a prisoner watching his own gallows being built before his eyes. My father helped him to his feet and stroked his hair, but he didn't try to lie to him. He never told Holden that everything was going to be okay. The tapping at the window continued throughout the rest of the night. We stayed huddled together in the living room for so long that I lost track of how much time had passed. Eventually, my mother tried to take the three of us to a bedroom while my father remained seated, keeping watch over the doors. As soon as we stood up, the knocking started again. It was so loud that ignoring it was impossible. I was afraid the door wouldn't be able to withstand it any longer and would burst open. We went back to the living room and sat down. The knocking stopped. Only the tap, tap, tap remained, and it just kept going. None of us slept that night. Around 7 in the morning, the tapping finally stopped. That was also when the sun came up. We waited another 2 hours before my father raised the shutter on one of the windows. First, he moved all of us into his bedroom and closed the door behind us. I heard him opening all the shutters in the living room before coming back to get us. "All right," he said. "It looks okay now." Holden's parents returned to town around noon. My parents took Holden back to his house, and the three of them went inside for a while. Nola and I watched from the window. She stayed glued to me all day, constantly at my side, sometimes even holding my hand. When my parents came back, they looked grim, but they didn't tell us what had happened. It was Sunday, so our whole family stayed home together. We ordered pizza and watched movies. That night, everyone slept in my room. Nola and my mother slept in the bed with me, while my father slept sitting back in a recliner. From that day on, there were no more bangs on the doors. We didn't see Holden or his parents for the entire following week. But around Thursday of the next week, a moving truck was parked outside their house. Nola and I watched them carry their belongings into the truck all afternoon. What I remember most was the exhaustion on Holden's face and on the faces of his parents. All three of them shared the same pale skin, darkened lips, and sunken eyes. Even from across the street, I could tell that something was very wrong. Holden and his family left before the sun went down. I remembered what the welcoming committee had told my parents when we first moved here. Not everyone who saw the Whistler died. But even so, the light of life seemed to leave them, and for the rest of their days they would live in misery, trapped in a chain of small tragedies. I think Holden's parents saw it too. Maybe it was to comfort him. Or maybe it was so they could share the burden together. Sometimes I watch Nola, happy, cheerful, and full of life, and I find myself thinking back to that night. If I had been just a little slower. If she had managed to look out the window that night. Would I have looked too? To comfort her. To share that burden. I'm glad I never had to make that choice. We still live in that house, in that neighborhood. I still hear the Whistler passing by every night. The blessings, the good fortune, the good things that happen here are too precious to give up. But we have to be careful. We don't let friends come over and spend the night anymore. And my father, ever since that night, has hidden the house keys very, very carefully. Not that I've ever tried to look for them or anything. It's the kind of thing you shouldn't be curious enough to go searching for.